All right, well, we're here. We're talking about Psalm 121. I've got Cory here. Cory's going to be preaching this sermon at our Layton campus. It's going to be great, Cory. It's what weekend is this? May 31st, huh?
It is.
Is what you'll be preaching on Psalm 121. So anyone who's watching along to prep along with us, go to that Psalm 121 post. And what we'll do, Cory, is why don't you just real quick get us started? Give us the little, three to 4 minute sort of small group overview of this sermon, and then we'll dive a little deeper once you do that.
Okay, so it'll be the second week of us diving back into Psalms after the larger series that we did last year. And the prior week, we will have done Psalm 139, which talks about God pursuing you and how he knows you, and he's the only one that really, really knows you. And so when I kick it off, I'm linking Psalm 121 to Psalm 139, and the idea that when things are going well in your life, it is easy to feel that way, that God is pursuing you or that you are pursuing God. But I talk about how Psalm 121 talks about how in the valleys of life, when things are going difficult, you can lose sight of what it takes to pursue God. And so there's the context of being an ascent psalm, and how in that context, when they looked at the mountains and having to take this long journey towards Jerusalem, whereas we can look at the mountains around Layton and the Wasatch Valley and think that that's inspiring and beautiful, that's not how they're looking at it. In fact, Jesus tells us of the Good Samaritan, and the reason that that will click with the Jewish people of that time is because the journey that he's talking about coming down from Jerusalem through the mountain passes was notorious for robbers and thieves, and it was a very, very dangerous pass to go through. So this is not a safe journey. It's one that's very scary to them. And so I will kind of break this up into three parts. So my big idea that I want everybody to anchor on in this sermon is the idea that when you get into the valleys of life, it's very, very, very tempting to believe that you're the one that's going to get you out of those difficult times. So Psalm 121 consistently tells the message that God keeps you, whereas my fallen condition focus, which is kind of that philosophy that I have of trying to take whatever the Bible is telling us, whether Old Testament or New Testament, and relate it to ourselves for what is the thing that is about our fallen condition that makes it how we can relate to this. So our fallen condition focus is that, I try to keep myself. I try to make my money keep myself. My nice home keep me safe and comfortable. My nice car make me feel secure. So Psalm 121 is telling us that God keeps you. And so
okay, so Cory, just real quick, so your connection to last week, which I think that's a great idea, is so last week God is pursuing you, and that you think about that in a positive sense, and this week it's a similar. I mean, the connection is God is with you, and He's your helper. You're not your own helper, basically.
exactly.
Good.
And the fact that how much importance we put on whether we feel God is close or not, and how our feelings, just because it feels that way doesn't mean it is that way, and that's the truth. We go to the Word for truth, and the Word is telling you right here that God keeps you safe. So the hook that I'm going to try and use to make everybody really, really drive this home for everybody is to think about the most recent time or the most impacting time in their life where they went through something very difficult, something very challenging, something spiritually or even physical sickness-wise in their life, where they were actively challenging the notion that they thought that God was near. And they almost question, does God really care for me? Does God really wonder, is God even here? And I want them to think about that and then hold them there, because then I will point to Psalm 121, where he says, I'm lifting up my eyes to the mountains, where does my help come from? And then from there I can roll into, okay, point one, when you're going through that time, your feelings are not true. God's word is true, and God's word is telling you that He's there. So you need to look to God and pursue Him when you're in those mountains of difficulty. My illustration for that is very personal in that when I was in Afghanistan, we went through 4 failed adoptions, and how difficult that was, and how I questioned God's goodness because I thought that I was doing what God wanted me to do, and yet I was going through this incredible emotional pain. And so, whereas I will say that I experienced a spiritual failure in that I was angry with God, he redeemed that, and my lesson to people would be to encourage them to be seeking God in those mountains. And so the application to that is, hold on, let me get there to my notes. Young people, do you find yourself hanging out with people who put you in situations where you struggle about doing God-honoring things? Parents, do you find yourself at your wits' ends trying to provide structure and safety and discipline for your sons and daughters? And so I try to point them to, okay, well, you need to be praying, you need to be reading God's word, you need to be spending time with God's people, because if you get in the midst of all that and you're struggling with your feelings about how you feel that situation, and you're not purposely praying, purposely in God's word, purposely with God's people, then you will lose sight of your spiritual safety in the mountains when you need to be pursuing God in the mountains. So then, remember, God is in control. By the way, this is just feedback. I'm sorry, this feedback's live, I guess. I know the PDF is not live yet on pursuegod.org.
Okay.
But when you look at the page right now, the main points are not the main points that are on Steve's sermon.
Yeah, I noticed that. I don't know if you got a chance to see the video, his sermon video. I didn't watch it yet. Which points are on the slides? So the first main point is the same, of pursuing God in the mountains. Okay.
The second point is on the page. It says, "Remember God's power."
Yeah.
But in Steve's actual sermon, it says, "Remember God is in control."
And which one's in the note? Which one is on the slide?
Remember God is in control.
Okay, so Steve's notes.
And it actually works better that way. Remember, God is in control.
Yeah, we'll make sure to adjust that. I noticed that last time I was talking with Jody about it, and he's noticed the same thing, and I wasn't sure which one was going to be which. We'll make the switch. Okay.
And so remember, God is in control. So my story here is about how we can fall into the trap of believing that this is all about our physical safety, when in reality, when we focus so much on our physical safety, that is losing sight of the fact that the Lord has everything within his control. And really what we need to be doing is seeking God's sovereignty over everything, and making sure that we are spiritually safe. And so I talk about how when I was in that situation in Afghanistan, I was selfish because I was more concerned with getting a family, which was a right that I thought I had, instead of being right with God. I forgot that that God is God and I am not. And when you lose that focus, you are losing sight of the fact that the Lord is your help, the maker of heaven and earth. And so if you keep that at the forefront of your mind, then it reorients what you should probably be thinking about in terms of the priorities of your life. So the application is, parents, you need to be much more concerned with the spiritual welfare of your children than their physical safety, what we think we need. The eternal state of our children's souls is of infinitely more importance than whether they get hurt or get into college or find the right spouse. All those things are really important, but are we praying for them to seek the Lord, that their heart would be drawn to him, that they would have a hunger for his word, and that be boldly proclaiming Christ? And then I really get, yep.
And I like how you say, remember God's God and I'm not. That's good. I think that's a good place to bring that idea in.
Awesome. Young people, I'm going to go with them here. I'm going to challenge them. I'm going to say, young people, are you more concerned with the status of your phone, your physical enjoyment and satisfaction, than you are about the status of your soul? Again, we live in a culture where we don't have to wonder about whether you're not going to be alive tomorrow. It's very easy to get up to school, go to school every day, come home, play some video games, play with your friends, go to sleep, wake up and do it all over again. What happens if you die tomorrow? Have you thought about what's going to happen to you? because you're going somewhere. It's just a question of where. So when you seek God in the mountains and you're continually reminding yourself that God is in control, pray, read God's word, hang out with God's people, you need to ensure you're focusing on what is internally important. And to help you do that, you can trust in God's promise to guard us. And so I'm going to admit that I'm a little weak on this point because I'm kind of putting the meat on my sermon right now.
Okay.
So I really liked what Steve did online and talking about how he will not let your foot slip. He watches over you. There's two kind of points that I'm going to make here, focusing on the shade at your right hand and that the sun will not harm you by day nor the moon by night. And the point is trying to get to the closeness of God. So the idea that I will always remember that when my daughter, really started to become aware of her surroundings and she's starting to walk, she was fascinated by my shadow, right? And how she wanted to try and get me away from my shadow or chase my shadow or jump on my shadow and all these kinds of things. And the idea of that word shade, that it's literally trying to communicate that you are standing in God's shade. He is so close to you all the time, whether you feel like it or not. You're inside his shadow. Oh,
that's good. That's a nugget right there, Cory. That's good. Just the whole idea of closeness.
And then the problem is, right, that sometimes we don't feel like he's close, and we may not even see his shadow. And so I have an illustration where I talk about how when I was like, I don't know, maybe 8, 9 years old, and I was playing t-ball, and I wasn't very good, and so they put me in the outfield, right? And so you're in the outfield, and it's t-ball, so there's not a lot of balls coming your way. And, I ended up sitting down and, kind of playing with whatever was there. I just was not paying attention. And my dad, fairly competitive, right, he got on me, rightfully so, about not paying attention and doing what I was supposed to do, and to make me think about not being, completely dedicated to what I was doing, he made me walk home. Now it's like 3 to 4 miles home.
Wow.
And I walked home the whole way as an 8, 9-year-old kid. Now, in my anger and in my frustration and why is he making me do this and blah, 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 I never turned around. If I would have, because over a decade later, I sat down with my dad over a beer now, well, a little bit more than a decade, and shared with my dad that frustration of that particular instance. And he said, I never left you alone. I was 2 or 3 blocks behind you in the car, making sure you were perfectly safe.
That's cool. That's a great story.
And so, again, you are in his shade, and you may not even see that you're in his shade or recognize he's around, but he is closer than 2 or 3 blocks, making sure that you are perfectly safe.
I love it. That's a great story. Perfect.
So, and the reason that's going to be important, just personally, is my dad and mom actually are going to be visiting that weekend and are going to be probably in the front row, I imagine. Although my dad doesn't like loud music, so he may not sit in the front row. We'll have to wait and see what happens. Okay, now believe the destination is worth it. So I really like the fact that Steve really expounded upon the now and forevermore statement. I'm going to figure out a way to try and link that into my sermon. The idea that whenever the Bible is using the words and forevermore, it's trying to make you lift up your eyes and focus on eternity. Now, what I'm going to do different here, though, is believe the destination is worth it. I'm going to focus on how Jesus is the ultimate example of Psalm 121. The fact that he didn't want to go to the cross, which was on a mountain called Mount Calvary, and he didn't want to do that, but he pursued God. He was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane and saying, Lord, I do not want to go through this, but if this is what you want me to do, I will. And then, he says that...
Make sure to... Sorry, Cory, I would make sure to say he pursued... I would maybe... This is a little technical, but I'd say he pursued the will of the Father.
Maybe the will of the Father.
Maybe say it like that rather than say he pursued God, because that people might be like, wait, so he's not God?
Oh, yeah. got it. Perfect.
Just kind of a technicality.
Yeah, I know. Being sensitive to that language, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, he goes to the Garden of the Gethsemane and he says, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And so he pursues the Father's will, and he trusts that God, the Father, is in control and has the right plan, and this is the only way in order to provide a way of salvation to man. And he trusts in God's promise to guard him in the midst of that. And so he goes so that we can have a promise and a destination that is worth it. That no matter how bad the valleys and the mountains and everything and how scary and bad that looks now, that the forevermore really is hopeful, because there's going to come a day when, and then this is the Revelation 21, there's going to come a day where there's no crying and no suffering. And my knees and back that kill me now because I'm getting old, that's not going to happen anymore, and I'm going to be given a new body, and it is going to be an eternity with my Lord that I can't even comprehend at this point. That is the destination that is worth it. And then I'll close and wrap, but that's the promise that someone who follows Christ can believe in. If you don't have that promise, then you need to place your faith in Jesus Christ. But if you are a Christ follower, you need to recognize that even you are going to experience trouble, and that's why you need to always be pursuing God, getting in God's Word, praying, surrounding yourself with God's people. We have resources for that with small groups and all these, and tying it all back to everything that we're providing through Alpine. And then I'll pray and I'll close. That was longer than a 4 to 5 minute summary of my sermon, but there you go.
No, that's good. That's good. No, because you were kind of getting into some details, so that's perfect. I love it, Cory. I like your stories. I think your stories really are focused. Okay, but now that you've said all of that, so tell me your big idea one more time. Tell me your 1 or 2 statement summary of it. Now that I've heard it all and the viewers have heard it all.
So, God keeps you. So don't fall into the human trap of believing that you keep you. And so to ensure that you're allowing God to keep you, seek Him in the mountains, know that He is in control, trust in His promise to guard you, and believe that the destination is worth it.
Okay. So, okay, good. So a couple questions and then just one comment. The title is Learning to Trust in God's Protection. And as you were explaining where you're gonna take this, which is pretty consistent with where Steve took it. Maybe the one thing that he does a little differently is he talks a little bit more. Well, I haven't heard his sermon yet, so I apologize. But in his article, he talks a little bit more about sort of protection along your journey, I would say, in life. So this is your journey in life. The kind of the idea that the pursuit of God is more than the destination; it's the journey. And so I don't know if he uses those kinds of terms, but what he says, I'm reading what he says at the end. No matter what type of hill you might be facing right now, don't give up on pursuing God. Okay, so, and I think you've certainly got that in there, right? But one of the things that when Jody and I talked, one of the emphases in that first point is just about how scary it could be, right?
Yes.
And so he's talking. He's going to. I think, if I remember right from what Jody said, is he's going to sort of emphasize some scary situations you might be in, right? So some of those might be a job loss, any one of these situations where you find yourself having to trust Jesus in the midst.
So instead of trying to use that situation as a thing in the front, or maybe I wrap it up with, okay, so now let's bring it back to that question. Remember at the beginning I asked you, what is that one time, that one thing? If you're currently going through that, if you're if you're wrestling with is divorce a reality for you? Is somebody really sick and it's really scary because you didn't see that coming? Did you lose a job and you're really struggling with finances? You know, all the things that anybody could be struggling with. If that's the thing that you're dealing with right now, and this sermon is trying to point you toward, it's because we want to help you continue to pursue God in the midst of that difficulty.
Yeah, good. Okay, so Cory, let me ask you a question just for clarity's sake. And again, anyone watching this, think about this for yourself before Cory answers. You try to get your own answer in your head. When it comes to the pursuit of God, and we define it in terms of 3 primary activities, right? How we start by trusting Jesus. So truth 1 is, it also can be viewed as sort of activity 1. Activity 1 is we trust Jesus. Activity 2 is we honor God, and activity 3 is that we help others. So is this a primarily 1, 2, or 3 sermon? Which one of those 3 foundational truths are we really bringing to mind with this sermon? What would you say?
So I'm giving people time to think about it.
Oh, good, Cory. Good job.
So I would say that this is a foundation number 1, trusting Jesus.
That's right. Perfect. Yeah, and so then I just think...
And I think it's important, you know, a lot of people who would say that they have actively given their life to Christ already would kind of write off foundation number 1.
Yeah, like we're done with that. We're done with that.
Right. Like I did that. I'm good.
Yep.
But the point is that our fallen condition can create situations where in our lives we may say with our mouth, but what we're doing in our heart and our life doesn't reflect that reality. And so this is everybody, even if you are a Christ follower, about following Jesus.
That's right. Yeah, and even more specifically, trusting Jesus. I think when I preach this, I'm gonna make sure to bring that in. Maybe in the setup, or maybe I'm not really sure. Maybe it fits better in one of those points. But yeah, trusting God's promise.
Yeah. In fact, so learning to trust in God's protection.
Yeah, because
the emphasis at the end is the way that you do that is you learn to trust in Jesus.
Yes. And so the way I say it, Cory, is I like to say, if you've been through foundations, you learn that we start a relationship with God by trusting Jesus. But you're not, like you just said, you're never done with that. There are going to be new situations in your life, through different seasons in your life, where you're going to sort of be back in that place. Like, okay, do I trust Jesus now? I trusted Jesus for salvation in foundations, or when I came to faith. And I trusted Jesus when things were going great in my life. But do I trust Jesus now?
Yeah. I like it.
Just a real simple way to tie it into foundations and a pursuit of, you keep using the term pursuit of God, which is great. And so, again, the way we define that as those 3 main things. And so really today we're talking about trusting Jesus, and some of you might have thought, hey, I'm done with that, man. I already came to Christ. That was a starting thing, right? Well, yeah, that is how you started. But it's also how you live. I mean, you're always coming back to that. It's a circle, right? We're always trusting Jesus, honoring God, and helping others. It's not linear where you stop and check, check, check. Now I'm on the last leg and I'll be done. No, it's circular, right? And because your story is a good example of that, where you've been a Christian for however long, when you had that experience of having to trust Jesus in that new situation, where he didn't meet your expectations.
Yep. I like it.
So
and this is hard to do from a preaching from the stage. But I'll just share this illustration with you. Many new young Christians feel like their spiritual life is kind of a scramble all over the map, kind of. And it's very difficult for them to see that when you're praying, you're about God's people, and the Holy Spirit works through you. That, yeah, it's scrambled, but hopefully it's a scrambled.
Well, guys, it looks like we lost Cory, so I'll finish this conversation with him, but I think you get the gist of where he's going. I think Cory's done a great job prepping this sermon. And so if you're prepping this sermon, if you're going to be preaching at your church, hopefully some of this stuff was useful, the conversation that we had. The one other thing I was going to say to Cory, and I'll tell him this later, is maybe just to be aware, I love his illustrations, but just be aware of sort of bringing some humor and some levity, because we don't want it to be just sort of heavy for 30 straight minutes, right? So we want to make sure that we're bring some fun, some humor, and there's plenty of places to do that. Even some of his stories, I think, are going to allow people to laugh a little bit. So that's Psalm 121. Again, you can see the full sermon online. You can see the sermon intro video online. You can also see our notes and Cory's notes. He'll share those on that Google Plus Leaders page. So use anything that is helpful for you, and collaborate with us and share some of your notes as well if you're preaching this. Thanks for watching.